So we're going to just start with our anthology readings. So first to start is Windflower.
Good. Happy New Year, everyone. And the first poem I'm going to read is a short one, and it's entitled Senescence. A geography of a life in bones worn by bliss. You stumble up the ramp into the car, battered, an old bristle cone pine, sigh into your seat. We reach the river, your nose twitches, catching the scent of sand verbena and beach evening primrose. I open the door, all four legs full tilt ahead, defying gravity. That's for Izzy.
So the next person is Arlene. There you go.
A different kind of treasure.
Uh-oh. You're muted again, Arlene.
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
Do I start again?
Yes.
Hold on, don't go so fast, Sam grunted as he slipped off the smooth side of a rock and landed in an inch of water. He was glad he'd worn his hiking boots, but they were heavy and hot on his feet. With the sun angling towards late morning, he stopped to unzip the leg extensions on his pants, turning them into shorts. We can't waste a minute, Sarah called over her shoulder as she climbed along the edge of the creek. We've not even found half the clues. While she scanned the boulders for a quicker path into the pine forest, she lifted the brim of her cap and swished her ponytail across her shoulders to cool the back of her neck. But it's not a real competition. Nobody else has the directions we have because we all have different maps. Sarah stopped. How do you know that? Well, it was in the instructions. I thought this was a race, she wet her lips, a contest between teams to get to the treasure. Not really. There's a twist. We're supposed to write smell in our team journal and the our clue. Mark the clue with our initials, then put it back. Oh, was all Sarah. Get us out of our apartments and into the woods. He breathed in the smells of the sun-warmed earth and crushed pine needles, then raised a finger to alert her to the rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker nearby, the throaty caws of ravens. Oh, bother, I don't need a reason to get out of my apartment. I always have plans for adventure. Sarah scrunched her shoulders, then tried to relax them. Maybe it's just to help us slow down and be with the trees. And why do we need to notice our surroundings? Make a note? It just slows us down. I don't need to. Yes, you do. He raised his hand. Sarah glared at Sam. I'm not going to listen to any more complaints about my competitiveness or... A whoosh of wings interrupted her as a raven glided overhead, then rested on a boulder about 10 feet away. Looking down its beak at them, it stood stiffly in the sunlight. Its feathers are so shiny, whispered Sam. And it's so big, Sarah said on a slow breath. I've never been this close to one before. The raven cocked his head and hopped toward them, then did a shaking dance of sorts. Sam asked, I think it's trying to tell us something. Wonder what it wants. I've got a few peanuts. Do I just throw a few at him? Or put them in that crack on that flat rock between us? Sarah started toward the spot. The raven jumped and ruffled its feathers. A web of light reflected around its neck. What's that? Sam asked. Looks like a necklace. No, a tangle of something. Sarah wanted to get closer, but didn't know how. Well, Mr. or Miss Raven, she said. Will you come for a treat and show me what's around your neck? The raven dipped its head and made a quiet clucking sound, its chest puffing with the effort. It's too skittish, and I'm not going to be able to balance here for long, Sarah said. From behind her, Sam duplicated the bird's clucking sound in his throat. Was that you? I didn't know you could do that, Sarah murmured. There's lots you don't know about me, he said. Well, I'd like to, though. Sarah cocked her head and said quietly, I've wondered how you found me and guided me off that ledge last year, or arrived at my pace with ice cream when I was in the dumps about losing that account. I just have these feelings, like intuition, Sam admitted, especially for the people I care about. Sarah cleared her throat with a nervous cough. Are you always waiting for me to get in trouble? Sam chuckled. The raven hopped backward at the noise. Sam took a deep breath and continued, No, Sarah, really. I'm just with a jump, the raven landed nearer the peanuts, then shuffled from one foot to the other. Clumped fishing line flashed around its upper chest and neck. In the anthology, you can read the rest of the story about how Sam and Sarah thin the boundary between themselves and the raven. Maureen, I believe, is next.
I am. And my poem is called Trio Sonata. From the motel swimming pool, a kind of music drifts. Swimmers' strokes like swish of brush on cymbals. Voices in languid conversation. Sweet like a clarinet or tenor sax. A mother and two grown daughters, possibly. Some words float in. Airport, waiting, tired. Women at peace with each other on their way home. And now it's my pleasure to pass the mic over to Susan.
Thank you. I shortened mine a little bit to fit in the 5 minutes so it wouldn't make sense otherwise. So mine's called Remembering Kathy. My name is Caitlin. I am the grandchild of Kathleen. My Nana Kathy passed away last Thursday, and my mom was wondering if you wanted to come to her memorial service. I see your pictures in my Nana's scrapbook from your trip to Europe all the time. My Nana talked about you often. This Facebook message is our last resort to get in touch with you. We would love to have you there if you could make it. My heart raced, aching with sadness and memories. For decades, Kathy was an important part of my life, although we had not spoken in recent years. Before we met, I heard about her. As a student in my friend's group counseling class at the college where I worked, Kathy sat silently in the small circular room for an entire semester with a coat over her head, too scared to speak. That was her introduction to college, where she showed up after her husband confronted her alcoholism with the words, "Living with you is like committing suicide." Then he walked out the door. By the time we were introduced, Kathy was talking in the second term of the therapy group, now visible as a somewhat overweight woman in her early 40s, always in jeans and sandals, without makeup, and straight grayish brown hair. She and her counselor, Diane, decided it would be healthy to run around the football track together. Because I started jogging the previous summer, they invited me to come too. Daily, said Diane, even if it rains, buy rain gear. We're running no matter what. At the first sign of dampness, Diane bailed, but Kathy and I carried on. Our friendship began as we huffed and puffed around the field. Shared musical interests provided a conversational starting point, morphing into our first excursion together, a Joan Baez concert at Stanford's Outdoor Theater. Our second event, Bob Dylan in San Francisco. Next, an all-day Bread and Roses concert at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, an annual multi-artist event sponsored by folk singer Mimi Farina. On the surface, we had little in common. I toiled away on my doctorate while she completed her first year of college, constantly fearing failure. Only 6 years older than me, she divorced while raising 5 children. I remained unmarried and childless. Kathy scraped by with loans and financial support from her ex-husband. My academic career allowed me to pay bills with money left over. In other ways, we matched. Kathy had a working class aura, reminiscent of my father and his brothers, including incorrect grammar, which felt comfortingly familiar. She had a hysterical, self-deprecating sense of humor, which made me laugh constantly. When she confessed she'd driven in reverse on the freeway after missing an exit, I admitted I'd done the same. And she had an amazing heart, including at the age of 20, taking in her 2 younger siblings when their parents died in a car crash. I admired her endlessly. We camped in the Santa Cruz Mountains, so stoned we could hardly wash the dishes from laughing so hard. We backpacked in Point Reyes, where our tent fell down and almost blew over a cliff into the ocean. On a driving trip to Ann Arbor, returning in an Audi 4000S to my boyfriend, Kathy was in heaven. Her own car's paint was peeling so badly that her children requested being dropped off a block from school so as not to be embarrassed in front of their friends. Since Kathy's previous experiences included only California and Nevada, we side tripped from Michigan over the border into Windsor, Canada, so she could say she'd ventured out of the US. 2 years later, we traveled together for several weeks in England, Scotland, Wales, and France. Over time, our friendship deepened. I was there when her son was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, legally blind before his teens. She called me, hysterical, when accidentally backing the car over her children's kitten. Kathy was also there for me. She spent the night at my house when my relationship broke up. She also stayed the first night I brought my adopted daughter home from the hospital. We called each other and cried when John Lennon was shot. She graduated from community college, the only one in her family to earn a degree. Eventually, she earned a bachelor's in sociology from John F. Kennedy University. When I spent a year in Ann Arbor, Kathy felt abandoned. Later, I lived in England. She was dismayed about being on her own. I told her she needed more than one friend. Somewhere during those years, Kathy confessed she loved my daughter, but she'd spent enough time with little ones for a lifetime. She began to withdraw. I was sad, but understood. Having children changes relationships. When I moved to England a second time, Kathy developed new friendships. After I returned to the Bay Area, things were no longer the same between us. I met the women she hung out with, but felt no real connection to them. Occasionally, we still talked on the telephone or met for lunch. Her family invited me to Kathy's surprise 60th birthday party. I went. She called crying when her granddaughter died. I attended the memorial service. She phoned to tell me she was retiring. I took her out to lunch to celebrate. I told her I missed her. I wanted to reconnect. She said she missed me too and needed to be away from her friends. They're not healthy for me, she said. We agreed to see each other more frequently, but nothing changed. I called several times, months apart, and left messages on her answering machine. No response. She often had a temporary roommate, someone who needed a free place to stay, a niece, one of her children, a friend. Perhaps they didn't tell her about my calls. I telephoned that our mutual friend had been appointed interim college president. Kathy left me a message that she'd read it in the paper. I called to tell her I was retiring. No reply. I gave up. At the memorial, I learned Kathy struggled with Alzheimer's for the previous 5 years. Her children took turns living with her until they could no longer handle her needs. She moved to a care facility. I cried at the funeral and chastised myself for not trying hard to keep our friendship alive. Perhaps her lack of response related to early symptoms of the disease, I'll never know. Although she died recently, I'd already missed her for a long time. Next is Mary Ellen Campbell. Is she here? I don't see her. Fran, do you want to go next?
Yes, I'll go next. This is the French Connection. First, I learned his name, Roger. Second, that he'd spent a Fulbright year in Strasbourg. Surely an auspicious beginning for a blind date. We'd both studied in France for a year. After a whirlwind courtship of 4 weeks, we decided to marry. Planning the wedding menu was an adventure and a top priority. The caterer who won my approval wanted to know about me before discussing food. Tell me about yourself. I teach French. Voila. May I recommend pot au feu with spring vegetables? And he sealed the deal by suggesting devil's food wedding cake to delight my love of chocolate. My husband and I didn't make a big deal of anniversaries. We preferred a quiet dinner at a favorite restaurant, calls from our kids, and cards from family and friends. But we made an exception for our 50th in 2011. We planned a family vacation in the Northwest, combining a return to Olympic National Park with a visit to the Bouchard Gardens in Victoria. We'd spent time in the park in August 1977 and never forgot the banner headline screaming from the Peninsula Daily News. Elvis dead. We weren't fans, but still, Elvis. For the big 5-0, I fantasized a festive dinner and recalled an outstanding restaurant from our long ago trip, the Three Crabs in Squim. Best crab I ever ate. Roger smacked his lips in remembrance. Our son checked online. You might want to reconsider. That was 34 years ago. Everything on Yelp is negative. Our daughter did her own online search, and that's how we ended up at C'est Si Bon in Port Angeles. When I called to make a reservation, I was charmed to learn that the woman with the French accent was the co-owner and chef. I'd interrupted her preparing bouillabaisse. I could almost smell the garlic through the phone. Switching from English to French, I told her that my husband and I had both studied in France. Madame, she replied, ce sera un grand plaisir pour moi de vous préparer un délicieux repas. It would be her pleasure to prepare a wonderful dinner for us. The restaurant was a 40-minute drive from Olympic Park. We all dressed up for the occasion. We were greeted by an impressive wrought iron gate with a large sign, a colorful French coq sporting brilliant plumage. A formal garden gave way to a long covered walkway. Clearly, this was a special occasion restaurant where one made a grand entrance. The dining room decor was red with a capital R. Large round tables and upholstered armchairs, glittering chandeliers, fine china and crystal, flowers on every table. Our granddaughter Lily, a lively 7-year-old, tiptoed up a short flight of stairs to a petite Juliet-type balcony where she discovered a merry-go-round horse and plump banquettes. Roger whispered, "It looks like a bordello." Our loquacious host, Norbert, silver-haired and French, was charming. He showed us the private banquet room, spacious and tented, suitable for weddings and state occasions. Fortunately for us, we were the only party booked for an early dinner. After bringing menus and taking our order, Norbert regaled us with family stories, how he and Michelle emigrated from France to Los Angeles in the 50s. She became a private chef for Hollywood royalty. He played violin and worked as a studio musician. We knew lots of stars, he said. On my way to the ladies' room, I found a wall covered with autographed black and white photos, actors of yesteryear, June Allison, Doris Day, William Holden, Danny Kaye. Dinner was exceptional. Roger and I shared carré d'agneau, a succulent rack of lamb, and we all enjoyed mousse au chocolat for dessert. Norbert served complimentary champagne in honor of our 50th. We drank a festive toast to many more years. Roger asked, "How did you end up in Port Angeles?" The town hardly seemed auspicious for a pricey establishment like C'est Si Bon. This was timber country, blue collar, fishing, hunting, faded jeans, and cowboy boots. We wanted to open our own restaurant, and LA was too competitive and expensive, Norbert told us. They had vacationed in the Northwest and liked the relaxed lifestyle. In 1981, land was cheap. They built a large restaurant with an elegant space for private parties. We're the only starred French restaurant in Washington outside of Seattle. He beamed with pride. The next writer is Natty Osso. Natty?
I said, thank you.
Nad-
That made me really hungry. My poem is Same Time Next Year. He walks on water, erect, lonely buoy, sways side to side, a cape of fog slung on his shoulders. He would stride ashore, but anchored to his purpose, he rings a vigilant bell, moans his despondent desire. Naked ladies acquiesce in belladonnas, rooted to the cliff face, a clutch of wallflowers at a seaside prom, all a rosy blush, bob on long stems, a quiver with longing. Spurned once again, they fade and fold back to bide their time, muster underground forces. They'll take their places, empty dance card in hand, for the star-crossed ritual, same time next year. Thank you. Next is Nancy Wallace Nelson.
Oh, you're muted, Nancy.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm on an Apple, so I'm doing a tech change. I have chosen to read words throughout my piece, just otherwise you would not catch the storyline. It's called The Art of Carpe Diem. Shaded by a misshapen straw hat, the elder woman sits on the long bench of concrete in front of the credit union. I see a weathered purse on the seat of the walker in front of her, and she's leaning over furiously, grabbing anxiously at its lining. Her thin coat is as soiled as her hat, and both are out of season for this chilly November day. As I am standing at my teller, I see her push her walker up toward Andrew, the young man the teller next to mine. She leans in as close as she can and says, "I need my money. I have to find my money." I know I have to listen in, and I hear him ask for information, and in a few minutes he says, "Ma'am, I'm very sorry. We do not have an account for you." She lifts her drooping empty purse toward him and says, "My son has all my money. I never thought I'd end up like this." I leave as quickly as I can and go to my car, those words repeating in my head. I never thought I'd end up like this. How many times have I said those words to myself when my husband Floyd was diagnosed with early onset dementia, when he died 2 years later, when our precious dog Shadow died 6 years after him. Shadow, who was really the only reason I survived his death. I never thought I'd end up like this. Yes, I all too well know those words, but whenever I've uttered them, I've been able to remember my past in order to negotiate my present. But this woman at the bank apparently cannot do that. Is there any way to know when we're crossing that line, that fragile line between competence and disorientation, to know soon enough to call in help from someone we trust? Are there signposts I should be watching for, or ones I've already missed? I obsess on this woman as I drive home. Maybe she didn't eat enough vegetables. Maybe she didn't know to eat the leafy green kind. Those are supposed to be good for you as you age. Maybe she didn't do yoga. That's good for you to help you age well. Maybe she didn't exercise at all, or do enough brain puzzles or mind games. Maybe she ate too much sugar. As I'm opening my front door, I hear the inner voice of Floyd. "You know, sweet pea, you can eat kilos of vegetables, leafy or not. You can exercise 8 hours a day and you can do all the brain puzzles you want. And you know damn well that if it's in your fate, you will not prohibit ending up just like that moneyless woman. Your obsession with her and with the friends who've died these past 5 months, that's only distraction from your own situation, your mortality, yours." Well, damn it. Floyd is correct once more. I've allowed myself to feel ancient and overwhelmed by this avalanche of friends who've died one after the other these 5 months. I've wallowed in grief, and I've overreacted now to this plaintive woman at the credit union. All because I've abandoned Horace. Horace, who said, "Carpe diem, quam minimum credula postero," which translates, "seize the day, put little trust in the future." Horace's wise words, carpe diem, which I first read in high school Latin and used as the theme for my graduation speech. Carpe diem became my lifetime pledge, And it helped me through my parents' deaths and Floyd's and Shadows and many, many tough events. Carpe diem was my healing mantra. Carpe diem supported me until I forgot. It's time to resuscitate carpe diem. It's time to stay in the present moment, every moment, for any second could be my final breath. It's time to celebrate every single occasion with friends, for each could be the last time we will speak. It's time to spend more time in the woods and the beaches before I'm unable to walk or climb. It's time to stand more often in a ring of trees in the moonlight and luxuriate in the shimmering glory. It's time to celebrate ideas and books and laughter more consciously and to keep on writing more often. It's time to shout a loud thank you out into the universe every morning. And then if I remember that carpe diem attitude, whatever my fate turns out to be, I'll be able to say, I'm just fine ending up like this. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm blanking on who's out.
Windflower. I'm
Oh,
good. Thank you, Nancy.
Okay, I
Enjoyed
didn't know you were
hearing
reading again. Sorry.
That's good. Enjoyed hearing you. Ground truthing, 3,400 miles. Ragged white chalk line, surging vast blue Pacific slaps into the continent. Winter storms break open sunstroke sandy beaches. Grains push southward, marching steadily down the California coastline. Disappear into submarine canyons, dams and diversions, drought and water, shorelines swallowed by the sea. Freshwater lagoon, seasonal winds swell an explosion. Salt water and terrestrial habitats meet, overlap, sanctuaries. Seawater mixes with fresh water, salmon and steelhead, sea in their bodies. Migratory path for 100 species, Pacific flyaway. It's a found poem that I wrote from an article in the Press Democrat from April 26, 2022 called A Coastal Journey. Thank you.
Sally Reynolds, you're up next.
I'm sorry, Susan, both times I lost my next line, sorry.
Sally, you need to unmute. There you go.
Okay,
That's
can you
it.
hear me? The
Yes.
story is called Killers. It takes place in a country doctor's farmhouse. His young daughter wakes alone, hearing someone at the door. The man was darker than the night. She flicked on the porch light. It flooded the stoop and made it seem like he jumped at her. She gasped and jumped herself. Lord, help me, please, miss. He was holding his side, blood oozing around his fingers, swayed in the door frame. She took his arm and supported him inside to her father's little clinic room. The doctor is out, but he'll be back soon. Hurting so bad. She steadied him and made him sit on the examining table. She could smell the blood. What a pitiful rag his shirt was. His pants were tied with rope, ripped down one side like he'd been dragged, everything splotched with blood. In the light, his face looked carved, cheekbones sharp like polished bronze. She'd seen pictures like that in an art book. He was older than she was, but not by much. She got scissors and began cutting the rags off his chest. He pushed her hand away. You asked me to help you. He looked at her for the first time. His eyes were green, green as jewels. Just don't cut me. Under the rags, there was a hole about the size of a dime, deep and black, a bullet hole. Blood welled up over the edge. The open flesh smelled like butcher meat. Did the bullet come out through your back? He leaned forward, groaning, and she looked at his back. No hole, the bullet was still in him. She got out alcohol, peroxide, iodine, forceps from the sterilizer, some gauze. She pressed a pad with alcohol gently around the hole. He grunted and closed his eyes. Next, she poured some peroxide on a pad, dabbed it around the hole. Some bubbled in. Shit, he cried. Don't curse me. He was staring at her with emerald eyes. Keep still now. She scrubbed the dried blood off his stomach down to the rope belt. Under her fingers, his skin was smooth, like polished wood, softer than metal. The hole had shirt fibers in it. With forceps, she plucked them out. Blood oozed, muscles twitched under his skin. This next one is iodine. It will hurt. She poured some in a dish, soaked a small plug of gauze. Grab the chair arms now. With the forceps, she thrust the gauze into the hole. He screamed, gripped the chair, but he didn't curse. She pulled the gauze out. The hole looked clean. She used more iodine, making a large red island on his chest. She'd never studied the skin of a Black person before. She taped on a thick bandage, looked like something a bear would make, but no blood leaked. She gave him 3 aspirins and a glass of water. His swallowing made a clunking sound. Now his eyes had turned the color of a green, stormy sky. The white glowed like lamps. He stood up. I'd be going now. She touched his arm. You could die with that thing in you. I gotta go. I thank you. That bullet could move. It could cut an artery. Don't you believe me? My father has to take it out when he gets back. After a minute, he gave a single nod. She handed him a blanket and watched as he eased himself back onto the table. She went to the desk, took out her father's pistol, put it in her pocket. She knew he saw her. Suddenly he said, "Where your mama at?" "She's dead." Oh, she shouldn't have said that. "You by yourself here at night?" "I'm sorry." I didn't. Is the time up?
No, go ahead. Oh, I don't know. Go ahead. It was somebody who wasn't muted.
Oh. Suddenly he said, "Where your mama at?" "She's dead." Oh, she shouldn't have said that. "You by yourself here at night?" "So what? I'm by myself a lot." "You let me in too quick. I could have been a killer." "Are you?" He made to laugh, but it hurt. He gasped and pressed the lumpy bandage. She watched the light play with his cheekbones and darken the hollows. "I didn't mean nothing bad about you, miss. Just you got the most angel hair I ever seen, like light." She shivered. Well, there's nothing of value here. Only my father's doctor tools, and everyone would know where you got them. His eyes died. She didn't know a Black person could blush. She turned and went upstairs to her room and locked the door. I don't know who comes next.
Maureen Epstein is back on the roster again.
Okay, Maureen.
And here I am. My second poem is Antipodean Christmas, and it's a memory of growing up in New Zealand, where the seasons are in reverse from where they are here. Antipodean Christmas. Gladioli, lilies, roses scent the midnight church. Kneeling stools scrape forward, knee joints creak. The service rolls, familiar fugue. The vicar calls the hymn. The choir, white surpliced, sings of snow and frosty wind, birth in a bleak time, light in darkness. Outside, afterwards, friends greet, share plans for picnics, beach excursions. Moonlight spreads its milky glow on upturned saucers of magnolia blossom. Thank you. And next Sharon Gilligan.
I'm reading the last part of this to fit in with the 5-minute. So to summarize, Eddie Burns is a police officer. He's called to an ER to interview a family about abuse after a child is brought in with a cut on her face requiring stitches. The dad who brought her in has left the ER and the child's mother is with her. The baby is just waking up from sedation. Mommy, where's Daddy? Go home now. Michelle Green looked at Eddie. That's a good question. Am I going to get to take my baby home? Eddie leaned over the child and introduced himself. Hi, Cinda. My name's Eddie. How are you feeling? Okay, but where's Daddy? I fall down. Need feel-good kiss. Michelle explained, Cinda scraped her knee last month when she was running in our yard. Bobby promised her a kiss would make it feel better. She stopped crying after he did it. Eddie nodded. I'll follow you, ma'am. I'd like to talk to Bobby and we'll see. He turned to the nurse. I'll let you know what happens. Eddie kept a tight tail on Mrs. Green. The last thing he wanted was to chase a fleeing parent with a baby on board. A mile from town, she turned off onto Happy Lane. The irony didn't escape Eddie. As they pulled into a graveled clearing next to a small single-story house, Eddie heard chopping sounds and smelled wood smoke. A wiry guy in a sweaty t-shirt was pounding a pile of wood, stopping only to feed pieces into the fire. Michelle held the still drowsy Cinda on her shoulder. What are you doing, Bobby? That's an old family piece. Mom's going to kill me. His teeth clenched, Bobby said, I don't care. That thing has too many sharp edges. It cuts Cinda up. He swallowed hard, and Eddie thought he might cry. It could have taken out her eye. Cinda raised her head at Daddy's voice. Daddy, we're home. I missed you. She reached toward Bobby, who looked at Eddie before touching his baby. Eddie nodded, and Bobby swept the girl out of Michelle's arms. He cradled the child's head as you would a newborn and kissed her cheek below the stitches. I'm so sorry you got hurt. Daddy should have watched you better. After a moment, he leaned over and folded Michelle into a 3-way embrace. Yes, Daddy, bad table. I'm hungry. The baby's quick made the 3 adults chuckle for an instant. Bobby let go and gave the baby to his wife. He looked at Eddie. So it was his duty to talk to the man suspected of abuse, and Eddie did his duty. Can you show me where this happened? Eddie followed the dad into the house and almost tripped on a warped board on the floor. That's it. I tried to cover the spot with the table so Cinda wouldn't fall. I guess I just made it worse. This afternoon, I went into the kitchen to grab her lunch, turned my back for a second, and boom. And Michelle's right. Her folks are going to be real bad about me burning it. I probably should have just stashed it in the shed until Cinda was older. But I was so mad at it and at myself that I had to. Bobby leaned closer to Eddie. Michelle wouldn't want me to tell you this. But by next year, there's going to be another little one scooting around. I had to get rid of that thing. Eddie asked the question. Not sure Bobby would give him a straight answer. Ever turn that mad on Michelle or on Cinda? Bobby met Eddie's eyes and said quietly, never. He gestured toward the warped floor. And first thing tomorrow, I'll be at the hardware store to pick up what I need to fix that dam. I'm not waiting for the landlord to do it any longer. 10 minutes later, Eddie shook Bobby's hand, got in his car and left. Bobby Green was a lot like him, a grown man not sure what to do with his anger, not knowing how to manage the world without striking out. Eddie had wanted to rough up Bobby. Bobby settled for a piece of furniture. He would call Marjorie, the nurse, and tell her Cinda was safe. He wouldn't tell her why he was so sure, but he knew the baby was cherished. It was Bobby's hands that convinced him. He watched the rage in them, hacking the object that hurt his baby, and saw the stillness and strength when he held her. He wished someone had touched him that way just once when he was a kid. As he reached for his phone in the overhead caddy, he felt the familiar twinge in the elbow his father had crushed with a maul for using his chainsaw without permission when he was 9.
Elizabeth Kirkpatrick Vranios.
Okay, I see Mary Ellen has joined us and hope she can, okay, you saw the message. My poem is called Pilot Light, which refers to my mother, who was a pilot light in my life. But I felt nothing. She was a stranger, now only body, vein, and bone scrabbling at the quilt. I had become an outlander, kneeling in the unbuckled light, split with grief, like a leaf still hanging on the branches of my beginning, dusty and howling, not from sadness, but for the want of her love. How can I describe love's grim silk, deep enough to bathe in, drown in? Mother, I still think I can extinguish you, like the candle on the kitchen table. See? Just a pinch. You are gone. But in the morning, I see you there, your insistent face in the mirror. Next up is Art Weininger.
Muted.
My technician is not on the job here.
Now.
The Tale of Two Rings. I first met Kate and Jerry, an attractive couple in their early 20s, when they came to my studio looking for a wedding ring. He was a tall man with black hair and neatly trimmed beard. She was considerably shorter with long blonde hair. They weren't sure what they wanted in the way of design, but they'd seen and admired my jewelry in a gallery and thought I could come up with something unique. After talking for a while about what aspects of my work they most liked, I offered to create 3 different models in wax for them to choose from. I think of my work as miniature sculptures, organic, free-flowing, and hardly textured. I use the lost wax method of casting, which means I sculpt something in wax, encase it in a plaster mold, burn it out in a kiln, and centrifugally fill the void with gold. I submerge the hot mold in water, and it's destroyed during the process, making each piece one of a kind. When the couple came back to see the wax models, they were delighted with 2 of them, but couldn't decide which one they liked best. I'll cast them both, I offered. The one you don't choose, I can put in my inventory at a local gallery or at an art fair. Someone will buy it. After I'd cast and polished the rings, Kate and Jerry came back to my studio to make their final decision. Her long hair swayed back and forth as she tried the rings, first one, then the other, on her finger, checking how each one looked and felt. Every time she glanced up at Jerry, silently asking for his opinion, he smiled down at her, obviously pleased she was happy. Still, she couldn't decide between them, and we couldn't help but choose. After all, she was the one who'd be wearing the ring. After much deliberation, Jerry finally said, "Why don't you take both?" Kate's eyes lit up. Without further discussion, they paid for 2 rings and left, saying they were delighted with their experience. But that's not quite the end of the story. A few weeks later, I received a package in the mail. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was one of the rings I'd made with a note from Kate. I love both rings, but I only want to have one wedding ring. No need to refund any money. We're happy with the price we paid, and we're returning the ring with the hope someone else will make it their first choice. I hope so too, and put the ring into my inventory for the next art fair. On the first day of the fair, a woman dressed in a long flowing skirt approached my booth and without hesitation zeroed in on Kate's ring. She lifted it from its display stand and put it on her finger. It fit perfectly, and she looked delighted as she admired it on her hand. Introducing herself as Susan, she said she'd been looking for just the right ring for a long time and was beginning to despair of ever finding one. I'll take it, she said, and reached into her purse for a checkbook. No, I said, it's already been paid for. Susan looked puzzled. I told her the story of the two rings and the woman who liked both rings, but only wanted to have one. Then I showed her Kate's note. Tears filled Susan's eyes. That makes this ring all the more special. It comes with good karma. She thanked me profusely and floated off to enjoy the rest of her day. Weeks after that art fair, I received a letter from Susan thanking me again. Will you please forward my appreciation to Kate and Jerry? I did that with double pleasure, thinking this was a perfect example of paying it forward for everyone involved. The end. The next reader is Erica Lutz. Erica Lutz, next reader.
Great, thank you. And this poem is called Burial. They've wrapped your body, frozen 9 days, in a peacock silk shroud. We've festooned it with artichoke flowers and lavender stems from the farmer's market. Just we 9, no weeping, no rending, no eulogy, no songs. This will be an unmarked grave. Granddaughters tuck notes in the folds of your cloth. Dad balances on his cane, nods. Final flight, final landing, they settle your silk against the soil. The hem of my long seafoam dress rips on my way down the hill to the parking lot. This dress I bought for the weekend you and I flew to Honolulu. When we walked out of the airport into flower fragrant air and you breathed. Thank you. Nona Smith.
Oh, unmute again.
This is an excerpt from a personal essay. It's the beginning of a journey that I'm still on. The title is, If You Heard What I Hear. As far as hearing goes, I'm not playing on common ground with most people. No level playing field here because I'm very hard of hearing. In writing this story, I'm documenting my disability and the journey I'm taking to rectify it. No doubt my hearing loss is an inherited condition, as my brother and sister also suffer from it. I hear practically nothing in the upper ranges. If I'm sitting across the table from you and the ambient atmosphere is relatively quiet, wait a minute, my technician just zoomed me out of here. Okay. If I'm sitting across the table from you and the ambient atmosphere is relatively quiet, I can get by reading your lips and picking up context clues. But put me in a crowd or a restaurant with hard surfaces, at an airport listening to announcements over a loudspeaker, in any conversation where cross-talking occurs, and I'm lost. Especially if people are wearing masks. I need an interpreter to translate the garbled words I hear, and I'm very grateful for thoughtful friends and relatives who act as one. But the truth is, I hear less than half of what is being said, even under the best of circumstances. I wear hearing aids and I'm thankful to have them. However, they can do just so much, which is increasingly getting to be not quite enough. I got my first pair before my 50th birthday, tiny things that fit completely inside my ear canal. Immediately, I began to hear things I'd forgotten made noise, a ticking clock, the clicking of a keyboard. I was elated and sprang from my chair to hug my audiologist. On my drive home, I was shocked to hear how loud I needed the volume on the car radio, and that directional signals actually made noise. At home, every sound seemed crisper. Noises that had once been familiar came back to me. I hadn't realized they disappeared until I heard them again. The hum of the garage door opening, the swishing of the dishwasher, the dryer's beep announcing a load is finished, the crunching of cat food being gobbled. It felt as if I'd been reborn. Over the years, as my hearing deteriorated, my hearing aids have gotten larger. The ones I currently wear, sophisticated devices with 4 programs I can manipulate as my environment changes, fit snugly inside my ear canal and loop over my outer ear to accommodate a larger microphone. They were expensive. Medicare didn't pay for them. Like glasses, the tests that confirmed I needed hearing aids were covered. The actual devices, not at all. Medicare has only recently agreed to pay for some brands. I own other appliances that enhance my hearing as well. TV ears is a piece of plastic equipment that sits on my chest and has earbuds that fit into my ears. It allows me to turn up the volume on the TV without blasting art out of the room. I also own a set of headphones, which I use for Zoom sessions with 3 or more people in attendance. Neither of these devices is perfect, but I'm glad these tools exist. The most helpful hearing assistance I receive, in addition to art, my compassionate friends, and my hearing aids, is called Call Caption. It's a phone device. The federal government provides these free to people with a documented substantial hearing loss. The phone captures the voice of the person I'm speaking to and turns what they've said into readable words, sort of. But I often doubt English is the first language of the person doing the transcribing. May not even be their 4th or 5th language upon the transcriptions I can read. I find myself further challenged by attempting to decipher what the transcriber has written. He'll hitch the truck at floor was what I read. I'll pick you up at 4 is what was said. And there are those transcribers who are a bit prudish and won't even type in the mildest 4-letter words. Hearing tests are always demoralizing events for me. In a soundproof booth, I'm fitted with earphones and handed a buzzer I'm supposed to press when I hear a beep. The beeps come first in one ear and then in the other, in varying pitches and at varying time lapses. Sometimes I sit waiting for a beep for a long time, knowing all the while I've missed many. As if that's not distressing enough, the second part of the test involves word recognition. Through headphones, single words are spoken. No context clues, no lip reading, just words. Say the word ash. Ask. Say the word throw. Row. Say the word far. Fart? No, that can't be right.
Okay, Mary Ellen, I think you're here, so you want to close with your poem?
Okay, I apologize. I had a little bit of an emergency here at the house and lost track of the time. So my poem is about my friend Oasis. I think many of you knew Oasis, the poet, and he is my neighbor. He is my good neighbor. Cutting daisies for a fresh bouquet, I saw him at the gate. "How are you?" I inquired. The usual greeting, more meaningful when the recipient is 82. He shuffled towards me on once agile dancer's legs. I met him halfway. "You've been away." "I had a lovely trip. I've been meaning to stop by to see you, but you know, It takes time to catch up. Those orange nasturtiums are just glorious, he says. I tell him about the fluffy fledgling phoebes. What are they called? Phoebes, I spell for him. I watched as they flitted from sculpture to branch, snuggling together, fed wriggling bugs by their mama. And the bluebirds have returned, I added. His unfocused eyes searched the garden for creatures, words, memories. Would you like to have lunch with me, he asks. I have extra meals filling my freezer. My mind counts the chores left to do. Sure, I'll bring dessert. I love your crisp. Rhubarb from the garden? Not too much sugar in it. We won't tell anyone. Surrounded by lilies, snapdragons, we shared our bounty. Looking up from his plate in a strong voice, he recited a poem about protests with the passion of youth. That's a wonderful poem. Thank you, he replied. You're a good neighbor. You are too.
Well, thank you to everybody who participated. We do stay afterwards if people have questions or want to talk about things. So feel free to join us. Otherwise, we'll see you next month, and we'll continue with the anthology readings the following month in March. Thank you all for participating.